Hello, happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday at 1 o'clock instead of Monday at 1 o'clock. That seems weird, but it makes perfect sense if you realize that I need to take Mondays off, and that means I still want to do an update, so we moved it back a day to Tuesday. Why Mondays off instead of other days off, you might ask? Well, I'll start by answering that question first. Back in November, I switched my days off from Mondays, which it had been most of my life, to Fridays so that I could interact with the staff a little bit more. And because a lot was going on, and that gave an excuse to do these updates on Mondays. But after 13 or 14 weeks, I know the right number because we've done that number of Monday breakdowns. I think it was 14. After 14 Mondays of trying, one of the things we've learned is Fridays are a terrible day off for pastor because that's when church kind of invades. That's when church stuff happens. People usually don't say, hey, a family member died and I want to do a funeral. Can we do it on Monday? That doesn't happen that often. Fridays, however, I had two of those in those 14 weeks. And just Fridays are when a lot of things are going on around here, and we need final answers about stuff before the weekend. And so it's not actually a day off. It's just a day I'm not in the office, but I was still doing my job on Fridays. Whereas I need a Sabbath just like everybody else. And so Monday has historically been the time for that for me. And I've decided to go back to that strategy. So that means these updates will no longer be on Mondays. They will be on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock from 1 to 1:30. That fits my schedule just fine. If I can remember an extra day in between when I preach to talk about that sermon, which I think I can. We'll see how that goes today. Good afternoon, Miriam. Thank you for checking in. So from here on out, we're going to do these on Tuesdays, Lord willing. That's the plan. So what happened 2 days ago? Well, boy, if you were here or if you watched online, you know it was a big Sunday, March 7th, because of the announcement pertaining to Matt and Carla. And I've gotten a lot of wonderful emails from people supporting Matt and Carla, supporting me, hoping to find out if I'm doing okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that today, and maybe we'll just lead off with that, and then we'll get to the sermon stuff later. But if you have questions about staff, now that the cat's out of the bag a little bit about Matt and Carla, I'm willing to take any questions or answer any questions as openly as possible about that. But I am very appreciative of all the support I've received from people who are worried about me with that announcement. And I don't want to make this announcement about me. It's about Matt and Carla and what God's doing in their lives. But just to answer some of those emails in this venue, I'm doing okay. I really am. There has been a lot of hard work in the last 16 months. May of 2019 is when I'll start the story, the backstory on this. May of 2019, I went on sabbatical the first 3 months of 2019, came back in April, and started to work with Ben. Was our youth pastor at that time. He was new. He had just started. We had a month before I went on sabbatical of working together. So he was still getting his sea legs, so to speak. We were still doing multi-site. We had two campuses going. Mike and Matt and Tim and James were carrying a lot of the load for that, especially while I was gone for 3 months of that. And so they were all very, very tired. And we had a pastor's day out in May of 19. We went out to Topgolf and just kind of bonding time. And I wanted to get my finger on the pulse of how they were doing. And we went out for coffee after the Topgolf event. And to a man, James, Mike, Ben, Tim, Matt. Is that right? And then me, make six. To a man, they were all just very, very close to burnout. And I had gone through my burnout in 2018, so I knew what that felt like, and I could see it on their faces. And so I made it my mission as a result of that meeting to do whatever I could to protect them and support them, and do, not that we weren't trying that already, but to really go to the extra length to keep them healthy and sane and not burn out. And so for that summer of 19, going into the fall, it was definitely work hard to make them feel appreciated, get them a salary that was consistent with the amount of work they were doing as a multi-site situation. So I went to a lot of meetings, fought as hard as I could for these guys. If you were at congregational meetings during that time, Mike wasn't exactly shy about his needs and needing for support. And again, I don't want to make this about any of them individually. This is my journey through it since I've gotten a lot of those questions. But a lot of trying to help them as they were growing increasingly tired and even frustrated with some of the processes and procedures we were doing, and the weird attitude differences between Sandstone and Lake Park, and what it was costing us relationally as a staff to have half of us in one place and half of us in another. There was just this tension and this sense that this is not sustainable. So when we went on our elder retreat in November of 19, we didn't go with any sort of, the staff didn't go with like, we're going to try and convince these guys to shut down Sandstone. That was not the model at all. We were still willing to do whatever the elders felt was right. But we went through on that elder retreat a breakdown of the letter to the church at Ephesus in Revelation. And we went through kind of summarizing all 7 of those letters, but primarily the Ephesus one. And what we talked about all day Friday on that retreat was, what would Jesus commend us on if he was writing a letter to the church at Longmont? What would he commend us on? And we made that list, and we went off in different areas as elders to pray about it and came back with our list, and we shared those lists. And there was a lot of good that was happening. Then Saturday we spent on the other question. What do we think Jesus would rebuke us on as a church? And we came together and we made that list and we put it on a whiteboard and we stopped at 25 things. And it wasn't that we were being hypercritical or that we were feeling that we were a horrible, horrible church. It was more of, these things need to be fixed. And it was some big things like relationally connected as a core value, and we're not doing that. And there were some small things like we have too many meetings, or the calendar is too full. We're asking people to do too many things. It was this broad shotgun approach to what do we think needs to be worked on as a church. And then, and only then, as elders, did we look at it and say, can we solve these things and still manage the multi-site strategy? And that's what led the elders at that point to say, maybe we should consider shutting down Sandstone. And the pastors had that conversation, and it was like once that option came on the table for the 6 of us, I could just see on all of their faces this sense of relief and release. And it was like somebody opened a window and all the toxic gas was let out of the room. It was just kind of like, really? Can we do that? And so when the elders felt that as well, that's when we went to the congregation, started having those conversations at both campuses. And it was hard. I remember January of 2020 being many, many, many meetings of people wondering, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? Does that mean that if this was a mistake? Why would we cancel a vision that we're just getting started? And I knew personally that even suggesting this as a conversation topic was going to cost me a lot of chips. In terms of just kind of leadership, because I was the cheerleader. I was the driver of that multi-site vision, because we needed to multiply. If you remember what it was like here before we went to Sandstone, those of you who were here, I mean, it was wall to wall. We couldn't offer more classes. We couldn't do more services. It was just, we had to have a multiplication strategy, and that one was one that was working in a lot of different ways. But the ways that it wasn't working were big enough that we had to reconsider. And so just to set the record straight, we did not close Sandstone or recommend closing Sandstone because we couldn't afford it. We could. It had nothing to do with the number of people that were coming. It was stable. It was sustainable. And we didn't strictly for the sake of the pastoral staff either. It was 25 things. But when the congregation finally voted on it, the vote was in the 90 percentile. So clearly what we saw as leaders was what everyone was feeling. But after that happened, I still had in the forefront of my mind, I want to make this work for these guys because I love these guys and I love our staff. So how do we change their job descriptions now that we're not going to be multi-site? How do we make this work so that when we come back together, everybody has a great place to work? And part of it was to build the relationship back into the staff and those types of things. By this time, Tim had already retired. And that was his choice, his timeline. We tried to do everything we could to keep him. But his mind was made up, and I think whether that was family concerns, frustrations with multi-site and what his job had turned into here at Lake Park, I do not presume to speak towards. But it was one of those things that, okay, you weather that storm. It was hard to lose a guy like Tim who knew everybody here. But then moving forward, and we did close Sandstone, and we worked. Hi, Matt. Thanks for checking in. We worked really hard we changed job descriptions. Ben was exceptional at some of the executive pastor things, so we worked that into his job description. Matt coming back to Lake Park, do we need a campus pastor the same way Sandstone did? So we tried to carve out a job description for him on discipleship and assimilation. Mike had become a really great second preacher for us, but coming back here, that wasn't the same schedule. So he was going back to music, but we also wanted him to participate in some of the adult ed disciple making stuff. James wanted to expand into some more of the visitation stuff that he's so good at, and some outreach stuff. And so we were working towards that and trying to work with the trustees, because they have certain standards for salaries and job descriptions based on title. And we realized, well, youth pastor isn't really what Ben is doing exclusively anymore, but do we categorize him as a youth pastor or as so that's when we said we're going to make everyone an associate. So the floor and ceiling on salaries is going to be the same. They're an associate. The only thing that would alter their pay would be their experience and education, stuff like that, which would be variables anyway. But let's get a clear title and reset everything, because we're resetting. So that was my thinking. Again, trying to pour into these guys and figure out what team dynamics were going to be in a reunited church. We started working with some people in our church who do Strength Finders training, Bert and Carrie Robinson. And we all went through the Strength Finders, and they took us through training. How can we blend this staff back together as best we can? And we thought, if we're not doing 2 campuses, we don't need 6 pastors. We'll do it with 5. And so we didn't really replace Tim. Matt kind of became the new Tim and wasn't involved in youth ministry anymore. So all of this is happening, and we're on the right path. And then, COVID hits. And now nobody has a job description that makes any sense, because we're all running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to figure out, live stream. Are we meeting? Are we meeting inside? Are we meeting outside? Are we doing pre-recorded services? Because that requires a bunch of tech. We're going to do YouTube streaming because that requires a bunch of tech. How do we do this? And so we definitely became foxhole brothers, trying to figure this all out together. And everybody brought so much to the table that was so good. But again, for anyone in any career path, anyone in any organization, there's that sense of, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I came here to do. And it isn't what I've been doing. And now I got to do this. And is this really what I'm wired to do? And for somebody like, say, Mike, who had a taste of preaching every week, and now is sitting through elder meetings where the discussion has to do with requiring masks, or are we open for business? And some people wanted us to stay open. I mean, if you didn't know, a lot of Christians had a lot of very strong opinions in 2020 about how to handle this. And that's true in any group of people. And that was true in the elder room. It was true in the executive board room. It was true everywhere. Of some people wanted us to never, ever close, and that would violate some huge ecclesiological value. And other people are like, how dare you be open, because that violates a big missional value. And so it was trying to thread that needle. And on staff, we had certain things we agreed on, and we worked hard towards those ends. And these guys did a great, great job. But at the same time, they're getting calls from other churches, because word has gotten out that, hey, Grace Church is doing all this stuff, and they've got these guys who are qualified to do these things, and they're not sure where they're going. And I don't know if I want to share this secret, but you guys should know, a church our size with a multi-staff environment, we get headhunted. People from other churches call and say, hey, are you available? I have a very firm no whenever I get that email or phone call. I don't even take that call. But you can appreciate why somebody like Mike or Ben or Matt would, especially when we're in that kind of chaotic situation. And so to see Mike go to be a senior pastor at a church in Minnesota made perfect sense. And we kind of knew it when we hired him 7 years ago, that music was going to be a stepping stone for him, and that was okay. And it just so happened that that was the timing for him, and it made sense. And it made sense for them to get somebody of his caliber during COVID as well. And were there other things going on behind the scenes? Yeah, we were trying to figure out our team dynamics. And it was difficult in that reunification and then in COVID. And so to say that they left for purely positive reasons to go somewhere else and that there were no negative reasons between me and them or between them and the organization of the church, I can't say that. That's up to them to say. But I can tell you for sure, I love those guys and fought hard to keep them. And I was sad when they left. Now, all that leading up to the announcement this last Sunday for Matt and Carla, similar situation, it just took a little longer, but I will tell you this. Of all the pastors who have left in these last months for individual reasons, they all have their own denominators. If I'm part of that common denominator, that's something the elders and I have been working through for about 6 months. And if it's management style, I want to get better at it. But I think for each of them, there were enough variables unique to them that I don't think you can make a full categorical claim. But Matt and I worked unbelievably hard to make sure that our relationship was solid, because he took that very seriously and I took that very seriously. And a lot of the emails and stuff that have come my way are like, are you okay? Because I think if I were a member of a church and saw 4 of 6 pastors leave in under a year or just over a year, I'd want to know what's up. What's going on with that senior pastor? Is there something behind the scenes that I should know about? And I asked that of the elders. I said, if I have a blind spot here, I want you to tell me. And they've been very faithful, and we've been working hard on that. But I just want to say, to his credit, Matt took that very seriously. And he, knowing that this was an opportunity that made perfect sense for his journey as a pastor, knowing how hard it was for him emotionally to leave the place he's been for 14 years with 2 high schoolers, with a house he's been working on for 2 years straight to make an accommodation for his mom. He wanted to make sure he and I were right. And we've had quite a few multi-hour conversations to make sure of that. And so, again, I can't speak for how all the dominoes have gone, but I can tell you with, as I said on stage on Sunday, with full 100% honesty, my heart for that man and my desire to honor him and his desire to honor me is completely solid. And so we need to bless them on their way out. And I'm telling you all of this as kind of a confession. And I know this is going out to the whole world. I mean, this is on YouTube. So that's why I don't want to speak for anybody but myself here. But I will tell you, I'm at peace with all these changes. I don't like them. I'd rather have those guys here than anywhere else. But the more I lean into this in prayer and the more I try and find God's plan for me and what this means for Grace Church, the more confident I am that the Spirit is moving. The Spirit is working. These are not changes that have been easy, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. That doesn't mean that they're somehow the enemy's getting in and breaking apart our church, or we're crumbling, or things are falling apart. That's really not what I'm sensing from the Spirit here. I think this is a redesign of our church, which we're already neck deep on some bylaw stuff. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the small group meeting that happened on Sunday. But I think staff-wise, it's happening. And it wasn't the plan that I had, but many are the plans of a man's heart, but the Lord determines their steps. And I believe with every part of my being that the Lord has determined the steps for Tim and Larita, and for Mike and Kara, and for Ben and Kim, and now for Matt and Carla. James is on sabbatical. I had a good talk with him before he went. I fully expect him to come back. We're hopefully going to be hiring a youth pastor here in the next month. And we're moving on to a care pastor position, which was already in the works. That will be kind of the next step after Matt that we'll replace him with, which I think is the right thing. Rather than taking all these guys who were tired and burned out and gifted in different ways and recombining them in one building, that was like the square peg in the round hole problem. And I worked really hard to try and solve it in 2020. And here in the end, I think the realization is I just couldn't. But that's okay, because now we know we have round holes, so let's go find round pegs for them. And I think that's going to be really beneficial for the church in the long run. Not that anybody can replace Tim, or not that we didn't lose a whole lot when Mike moved to Minnesota. I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just saying it's a new era for the church, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because now we can rebuild on purpose staff-wise the way we're trying to rebuild on purpose program-wise and bylaw-wise and all that stuff. So all that to say, I am doing okay. I am sad that my friends have left. It's going to be a weird season where there's very few of us trying to manage what's going on, but we just need to expedite some hiring. That's all. Not in a way that we rush it so that we get the wrong people, but yeah, I'm doing okay. And there's a relief that the cat's out of the bag on this as well. So that was probably a longer confession than I was intending, but I don't mind sharing that with people, and I want to be as open as possible. So continue prayers for all of those men and their families. Continue prayers for me and Abby. Continue prayers for Elisa and Todd, and Ali is here as well. So it's not like I'm the only one left. We'll keep working together as a body. So thank you for that. Now, Sunday, the sermon. I did want to talk more about that because I had a couple of really good questions after the sermon. So the sermon was on the parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin, and primarily pivoting around the opening of Luke 15, which is Jesus spending too much time with tax collectors and sinners for the Pharisees' taste. And so I tried to really point that out, that we as Christians need to act more like Jesus than the Pharisees. And we need to be constantly thinking about who he wants us to reach and who is lost. So we're heading that direction. It was funny, I was talking to Ali about it today, because in Grace Latino, the angle wasn't, hey, don't be a tax collector, or don't be a Pharisee, spend more time with the tax collectors. That was my main theme. The main theme in Grace Latino, because of the culture and the types of people that are coming to that service, was more, hey, are any of you the lost sheep? Raise your hand. And he's like, a lot of people raise their hands. So his focus in that passage was, if you feel lost, come back. Jesus is looking for you. Jesus loves you. Way more of an evangelistic sermon, which is definitely in those parables. Whereas I came at it more from, let's not be the Pharisees. Let's find some tax collectors and sinners to befriend, because the audience is largely believers in our context. And I just find that fascinating, that in one building, in two services that are happening at the same time, you can get both of those angles on the same text and both be right. So I like that. But I did have somebody come out to me afterwards and say, okay, Jeff, you say we need to hang out with lost people more. And I definitely said that, and I definitely believe that. But she said, what about the passages in Scripture like bad company corrupts good morals? What fellowship has light with darkness, good with evil? Come out from among them. And I thought that was a great question. And so I wanted to deal with it a little bit here in this kind of post-game comments. I think my answer to her and my answer here would also be, I think it comes down to a matter of influence. To the extent that we know our weaknesses, where we will be influenced to the flesh, to worldliness, to the kingdom of the world again, we need to have protective boundaries and barriers in place. And so if we know we are capable of being influenced away from the kingdom of God, we should avoid those areas. Bad company will corrupt those good morals. However, if we see ourselves as the influencers, as opposed to the influencees, and we have that ability in those areas, then we need to be influencing. We need to be out there bringing the gospel to the people who will respond to it, because they know they need a doctor. So I would not ask a recovering alcoholic to go hang out with lost people at the bar. That probably not the place for you. Definitely not the place for you, because that's an influence that will go the wrong direction. But there are places where a recovering alcoholic believer should be hanging out with lost people in a way that is not particularly going to lead them into fellowship with darkness. So there's that challenge of, what fellowship has light with darkness, good with evil, but yet we're still supposed to be the light on the hill shining to illuminate the darkness. So it really comes down to where you feel personally weak and would be influenced negatively, then avoid those areas. Have nothing to do with them if it is something that will get its hooks into you. But don't ever get that pendulum so far that you become a Pharisee and say, no Christian should ever be doing any of those things or involved with people who do those things, because now you're taking the mission away from those people. So it is an individual decision. Give yourself grace, give other people grace. But if there are ways you can be an influencer, that's the job. That's the mission. And to hide behind barriers of moralism is Phariseeism. That's the bad part of this story. So it's not a question of moralism. It's a question of your own personal ability to be light in darkness and not be overcome by darkness. So that would be my answer to that. But I thought that was a really good question. I wanted to make sure we had time to cover. I also mentioned in the sermon that this passage doesn't really allow for the sheep to be a Christian who decides to skip church and expects that the pastors will come and hunt them down or somehow pass a test. And I wholeheartedly, I feel very strongly about that. And I've just seen it so many times in my lifetime and in my career as a pastor of, well, I'm going through X, and I'm not going to tell the pastor that I'm going through X because I'm going to judge and see if he's a good enough pastor to figure it out and come find me, because I'm the one and he has to leave the 99 to find the one. And I can't tell you how many times I've counseled couples and even myself in my marriage of like, do you ever win by testing somebody by not talking to them? Does that ever go well for you? It never goes well for me. That's just an unfair expectation to have on somebody. I'm going to hold you to this expectation, but I'm not going to tell you about it. And then I'm going to judge you and see if you respond. That's a terrible strategy. And I'm not going to play that game as a pastor. And I don't like it when people play that game with me and then say, but I'm the one you have to leave the 99 to find. I'm like, that's not what this passage is about. But I will say this. The Matthew version of this parable is talking about wandering Christians. The context of Matthew, I think it's chapter 24, where he puts this parable, is different than the context where Luke puts it. And in Matthew's context, it is believers that are wandering that you should go find, but you should go find them to discipline them. It's not the same context of Jesus coming to the world to seek and save that which is lost. It's talking about sheep wandering from the flock through sin. And so even in that, where it is a believer that is the one that's lost, it's not this weird church shopping game that we've gotten into in our generation. So I wanted to back that up. Matthew 18, thank you. Jerry Foote, thanks, Dad. It's Matthew 18. So I wanted to highlight that as well. Last thing I wanted to talk about was we had a small group leaders meeting on Sunday after the services, and it was great. It was packed, and it's so much fun. Every week, I'm getting connection cards, people saying, I want to be in a small group. I want to be in a small group. And it's so exciting to know we're building a structure where we can put those people into. So keep praying for that. That is going to continue to be a front burner focus as we restaff and make these changes that are coming up here in March. There's definitely going to be that renewed investment into small groups. And it was great to have like 25 people in that room sharing that load and sharing that passion to say, yeah, let's do this and let's do this right. And let's set those expectations church-wide that you should be in a small group and here's how they work. So we're still crafting what that looks like and how they will work, but it's coming and it's going to come on purpose and it's going to be great. All that to be said, I am doing well, but I met with Elisa this morning and we decided if Matt's last day is Easter Sunday and James gets back from his sabbatical May 15th, that's 6 weeks where it will be Elisa, Ali, and me and part-time Tanya and Mary and Catherine. Carissa won't be back until May as well. So that is a skeleton crew. So we are committed to not making any major changes. I know I'll believe it when I see it, Jeff, right? But no, we need those weeks to be quiet. We need those weeks to be in a rhythm. So March is front-loaded with change. March is front-loaded with Matt's announcement from last week, a youth pastor candidating on the 21st, a couple big votes on the 28th to establish the new bylaws, Beachhead, to potentially hire this youth pastor to say goodbye to Matt and Carla. But the plan for April and into May is quiet. Shh. No big events, just the rhythm and the routine. People have said, how can we support you, Jeff, during this time? Obviously, volunteering is huge. We're going to need that kind of help. But it is going to sound really weird in the last 3 seconds I have. You know the best way to support me during this time? Try not to need me. Is that weird? Is that weird to say? Try not to need a meeting with me so that I can keep my schedule manageable. If you do need me, and if the emergencies come up, they come up, and I am at your service, because I am committed to being here for as long as the Lord will have me here, which is hopefully a long, long time, and I'm committed to doing my job as well as I can. But it's amazing how much meetings will fill up my calendar if I'm not careful. So if you want to pray for me, pray for a quiet calendar for those 6 weeks. That would be great. But I am excited. March is not quiet, and that's totally okay. As we head up into Holy Week at the end of this month and into Easter on the 4th of April. Got to celebrate the resurrection. There's so much joy. And now I can explain why we want to have a church party on Palm Sunday after those votes, is to say goodbye to Matt and Carla. And so make sure you come for that as well. So I'll try and wrap all this up and make the Thursday video with all these announcements a little clearer, but I hope it's okay. That was my ramble for this week. I felt like I needed to have this what happened with the staff in 2020 conversation with everybody from my perspective. I expect I'll have that with other people coming up, but love those guys, miss those guys, continue to pray for those guys. The Lord knows what he's doing, and he is certainly still active here at Grace Church. So there's always confidence in that, and faith and hope. So thanks for the prayers. Thanks for the care. Thanks for watching. Those of you who are watching later, for the 11 of you that have been watching while I'm doing it live. I guess that's where I sign off, and I will catch you guys on Thursday for my update video, but feel free to email or call the office, and we can chat as needed. Thank you. See you next time.